Victoria in. So we're still planning it. The first day is going to be dedicated for elders-led discussions about NRL, Northern Road Link, Webequay Supply Road, as well as the Martin Falls Community Access Road. And then days 2 and 3, we're still planning out, but we're hoping to be talking about and doing some interactive things around peatlands, the floating road, talk about that, as well as waterways. And then day 3, I think we're going to talk about the draft review process for the EA, environmental assessment and impact assessments for at least Martin Falls Community Access Road and Webequay Supply Road.
Just let me know what involvement you need from us, Jen.
Yeah, I will. We're just going to flesh it out a bit more this week, and then I'll loop you in, Tony, because
Okay,
we're
thank you.
probably going to need a whole bunch of your help.
Cool.
So I said that all in one breath.
That was nice.
You did? That was pretty impressive. Yeah. Take the rest of the day off, Jen.
Oh, thank you. I'll tell Ange you said.
Yeah, tell her I said that.
I'll
And
tell my
I give
manager
you the
that
right to
Don
tell me to
gave
take the
yeah.
rest of Jen, I give you the right to tell me to take the rest of the day off as well, too.
Okay, well after we do the radio program, because that's the favorite part of my week.
Yeah, okay, after the radio program. That's fair enough.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's fair enough.
Okay, we're 2 minutes out here pretty much. I'm going to go quiet in
All
the studio,
right.
so good luck,
2
guys.
minute
Have a good
warning.
show, and we'll see you on the other
2 minute
side.
warning. 2 minute warning. 2 minutes.
Yes, so I'm excited about the forum next month. January. Oh my
Yeah,
God.
it's going to be
I
fun.
mean June 11th to 13th,
January.
and it's
Yeah,
only
well.
Tuesday.
You know where you are right now?
I am in my office at my house in Robinson Huron Treaty Territory.
You are.
Do you know where you are?
No, not really. I've been in a state of I've been in
I'm
a state of
somewhere on the
confusion
interwebs.
for a number of years, Jen.
I'm in all places at once.
I'm in all places at once. I am everywhere.
Because you are on the interwebs.
I'm on the interwebs with I like the S on the end. That's good.
I learned that from my daughter. I stole it.
Interwebs.
The interwebs.
That's a great term. That is a great term.
She has a
I
lot
was
of
just
good
watching
terms.
the news. I was
Oh,
just
don't
watching
do
the news,
that.
Jen. Yeah, exactly. Well, did you hear about that shooting in front of Drake's house in the Bridle Path area in Toronto?
Oh, no, I did not. That's crazy. On
Yeah,
Bridle Path,
yeah.
no
Well,
less. Oh my goodness.
I guess he's in some sort of a feud with who was it? Kendrick Lamar, and so I don't know if it's related to this, but yeah, there's his security guy got shot last night. So
Oh my
the police are
God.
all over it. So yeah, it's quite the
Celebrity news
situation.
live from Don
Celebrity news.
Parkinson. Live on
I'm on
location.
top of I'm on top of it, Jen. If it's
He's
celebrity
coming
stuff,
he's
I
coming to
know
you
it all.
live from Bridle Path.
Coming to you live from Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Don Parkinson, and I'm a Senior Consultation Specialist with Atkins Realis. Today, we are continuing our series of live stream topics on the Northern Road Link project as it moves through the provincial environmental assessment and federal impact assessment processes. The topics we are covering parallel our project activities, so we hope these will help our viewers and listeners better understand the project and provide input along the way. With me today is my usual co-host, Jennifer Ashawasage Pereira, my colleague and an Indigenous engagement and traditional knowledge specialist at Atkins Realis. Jen, I think the acronym for that would be IETKS.
Yes, say
You're an
that. Pronounce it.
IETKS with Atkins Realis. How about that? There you go. So, okay, Jennifer is a member of Henville First Nation, located on the French River south of Sudbury, and works with me on our projects across Canada. Jen, welcome. Welcome back. Um, should be a fun topic today. Socioeconomics,
Oh
complicated,
yes, very.
lots of
Lots
many
of moving
things,
pieces there.
lots of moving pieces. Yeah, yeah, tons of moving pieces. It's one word, but it covers lots of different things. So today we're going to talk about the socioeconomic studies that we're undertaking as part of the environmental and impact assessments, and we're going to talk specifically about the socioeconomics study plan. So, without further ado, let's get started and do a quick run through of what we're going to cover today. We're going to kick things off as we usually do with a project background, just to get everyone briefed on the project, just in case they're not familiar with the project. And then we're going to talk about the objectives of the study plan for socioeconomics, the valued components and indicators, the methods that are and are going to be used, and then how you can contact us. So lots of ground to cover today. And well, let's provide a little bit of a background here. As you know, Jen, this proposed all-season road sits in northern Ontario on Treaty 9 land. It would connect the Ring of Fire mineral deposits to the all-season highway network, or the provincial highway network, via the proposed Martin Falls Community Access Road, which is currently
Mhm.
in the process, which is currently undergoing an environmental assessment and federal impact assessment as well. At the same time, though, and I'll get into this in a little bit more detail, the project will provide an opportunity for Webequie First Nation and its members to connect to the all-season highway or provincial highway network. Um, this project is subject to, again, to the Environmental Assessment Act, which is provincial, and the Impact Assessment Act, which is federal. Um, there are two proponents for this Northern Road Link project, Martin Falls First Nation and Webequie First Nation. And both First Nations are remote, so they don't have all-season road access. They're fly-in communities almost all year round, except for a narrow window in the winter, which seems to be
Mhm.
narrowing more and more each year. They are
Yep.
both located about 500 kilometers from Thunder Bay in a northerly direction. Um, and just as background, there's been a number of studies done previously on transportation corridors running through the same area. Finally, in 2020, the province of Ontario, as well as Martin Falls First Nation and Webequie First Nation, agreed to work together and agreed to serve as proponents for provincial environmental assessment for the project. So, and then ultimately the federal impact assessment, once that was identified as being required. Now, in terms of the interaction of this project with the two other all-season road projects that are going on right now, to the north, there is the Webequie Supply Road project, which is a planned 107-kilometer road which runs from Webequie Airport in Webequie First Nation southeast to just east of the Buckatai River in the McFalds Lake area. It would then connect with the northern end of the Northern Road Link, which then would run south and connect with the Martin Falls Community Access Road north end, and that would be in the Martin Falls area. And then the Martin Falls Community Access Road would then ultimately connect through upgraded resource roads to the provincial highway network. So that's where it all fits in, and the ultimate purpose is to enable economic activity by facilitating the transport of goods, services, and resources. In terms of the project, it's always more than just a gravel road. There are other what you call ancillary or additional infrastructure pieces that are part of the all-season road. The road itself would be a multi-use, right now, gravel road. It would range in length between 117 and 164 kilometers with a 100-meter right-of-way. The reason why the length of the road is a range as opposed to a single number for its distance is that we are just in the process of finalizing, identifying the preferred route, um, and so there are different route alternatives right now that I'll show you in a second, which result in the road potentially being longer or shorter. Some of the ancillary or additional infrastructure associated with the road is temporary and some is permanent. Some of the temporary facilities are storage and laydown areas used for the storage and laydown of construction materials. Maintenance facilities and yards would be permanent. Access roads would be required, typically to access the gravel pits and quarries where the material to build the road would be mined, and of course there would be the aggregate sites for gravel and rock as well, and then construction camps, which would be temporary, and there would be a few of these located along the route. And these typically have storage and laydown areas associated with them as well. In terms of the alternative corridors, I mentioned this a little bit earlier. We are again in the process of finalizing and identifying the preferred corridor, but there has been uh, different alternatives. There have been different alternatives considered for segments of road along the route, and but I think now that process is essentially finalized, and so we will be coming out with a preferred alignment very shortly. The map that you can see on your screen shows the different options labeled with letters. So you have, for example, C1, C2, and C3 for different options for segments, road segments, and then you have other options D and F as well. So let's now get to the core of today's topic and talk a little bit about the socioeconomic study plan and the objectives. And Jen, you and I were talking about how socioeconomics is kind of a big topic, isn't it? It's a broad topic
Oh, it
covering
sure
lots of
is.
different. Yeah, and you can go in a lot of directions with it, and so we're hoping through this study plan that it's very comprehensive. Um, And so some of the objectives, the overall objectives, are to basically describe the areas that we're going to study, and then the things like the boundaries, the specific study areas that we're going to associated with each of these. We're gonna, the study plan guides the implementation for how we gather data and how we conduct the effects assessment. So this is sort of our protocol, I guess, if you want to call it that, that we follow. So it's open and transparent, and it gets commented on through the regulatory agencies and through peer review as well. And the study plan is actually a coordinated approach to meet the regulatory requirements of both the federal and provincial. So federal impact assessment and provincial environmental assessments. And then the other part of another objective of the socioeconomic study plan is to share information, get feedback on the studies, from community members, the general public, government, and other interested stakeholders to make that plan as robust and comprehensive as possible. So as we do with other studies that we conduct as part of the environmental assessment or impact assessment, we have what you call valued components, which are what have been identified as being important, whether it's to community members, the general public, or technical staff. And I thought I would run through the valued components for the socioeconomic studies. The first is regional and local economy. So we're looking at the core of this is looking basically at economic activity at two levels, at the regional level and at the project level, at the local level. So we're looking at things like employment, businesses, procurement, how goods and services flow, and we'll get into it a little bit more specifically in a second to give
Mm-hmm.
people a better idea, and then I think they'll be able to follow a little bit better. And then we also are going to look at as a valued component or something important that we need to study is we're going to look at community services and infrastructure. And we all know that remote communities are often very lacking in these, and that's why it's an area of particular focus for this work. Um, so those, when we talk about community services and infrastructure, these are resources available to the community to help in making community members' lives better. Um, uh, so it could be housing, it could be healthcare, it could be emergency, it could be protection services like police and as well. It could be child care, it could be elder care, it could be just provision of clean water and management of waste as well. In terms of other valued components, there are there's land use and recreation. And when we
Mm-hmm.
talk about that, we're talking about commercial and non-commercial recreational activities that occur basically anywhere in around the project. And then another one, which is a really important one, Jen, as you know, is community
Yep.
safety. And this is a one that become, I would say, tell me what you think about this, but it's become more and more prominent over the last few years in particular, just because of the just better understanding now of how uh, unsafe communities can be due to lots of different
Oh, yeah,
factors.
that's it. And we
Very,
just went by May 5th or Red Dress Day. And so that really
yep.
highlights um, the lack of safety, I would say, across Canada for Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirited people. So we want to make sure
It's
we
so
look at
true,
those kinds
Jen.
of things. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and this, I don't think this historically was looked at in any level of detail on projects that initiated even just a few years ago. But now this is fortunately getting a lot more attention because there's just, and when you're looking at a situation like this where you're connecting the road to the provincial highway network, it changes things for community members, right? So
It changes a lot of things,
uh,
and we don't want the Wild West here.
yeah, well, that's right, because you're going from a remote community to a connected community, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when that happens, it has to be considered, and safeguards have to be put in place, whether they're systems or protocols or whatever, to ensure that people are safe and
Mm-hmm.
as safe as they were before, if not safer. So these are pretty important considerations to look at, and we'll look at that a little bit in more detail shortly. But it's going to be something that's looked at pretty thoroughly, I think, as part of the socioeconomic studies. In terms of indicators now, and when I talk about indicators, I'm talking about measures, um, actual ways of measuring impacts for each of the valued components. So let's just take an example, regional and local economy, for example. So some of the indicators associated with employment would be things like employment and unemployment rates, like what percentage of the population is employed or unemployed. Labor force participation rate. So
I have a question.
what percent? Sure.
So what's the difference between a labor force participation rate and employment and unemployment rates?
I think it has to do with. Well, I'm not sure, Jen, exactly, but I would assume it has. There's a subtle difference between
Hmm.
the the two of them, right? But I think it has to do with the number of people willing or able to work, right?
Okay.
And the proportion that are working, I think. So, yeah, that's something that the fine print would
Yeah, and
of
that makes
study
sense
plan
because
would be define that.
there there are people willing to work, but there may not be enough jobs, for instance.
Opportunities. Exactly,
Hmm.
that's right. And then again, another measure. Glad you brought that up because another measure or indicator is jobs available, right? So, they could look at a community and say, well, there's only X number of jobs available, but there's 1,500 community members, of which 40% are employable, right? And so, that indicates, if there's a small number of jobs available but a huge potential workforce, then it indicates a problem. You know what I mean?
Right.
So, and then on the income side, that income's another one that would be looked at in detail. And by all means, these are just examples, but you would look at
Yes.
things like median annual income, right? So when you talk about median, that means how that median represents. So that number, let's say if the median annual income is $20,000, that means half of the population is making more than $20,000 and half is making less than $20,000. And then you get into things like total income, after tax income, employment income. So there's a lot of different statistics that can be accessed, um, and they can serve as clues and guides, as to what's going on in a community. And again, we got to remember what we're trying to do here is establish a baseline, right? We're trying to um, paint the picture of the way things are now. We're also trying to describe, Jen, as you know, how things got to where they are now as well, because
Yeah,
that's very relevant, isn't it?
it
Um,
absolutely is. And we take into consideration things like the Indian Act and the effect it's had on people.
yes, yeah, exactly. And some of the other measures might be proportion of population with low income,
Hmm.
however that's defined, cost of living, right? So this consumer price index. So
Right.
it's a way of measuring inflation, like how much the cost of basic goods and services or goods has changed, up or down, usually up, as we know, and especially lately, up a lot. And then looking at prices, retail prices for select products, especially things that we need on a day-to-day basis, food, fuel, things like that, right? Um, and then spending on goods and services, like spending trends annually on goods and services per household as well. So there's a lot of different measures. That's only a few of them, but those are a lot of different measures for the regional and local economy. And
Hmm.
now, when we move to community services and infrastructure, which is another big one, and we could talk about this for quite a while, and we'll in later shows we'll get into this in a lot more detail, I think. But we'll look at things like housing and accommodation. So it could be vacancy rate, like is there available housing stock, right? Is there housing, like, or are there waiting lists for housing, which is the case quite often in the remote communities. Um,
Yeah, and how
you
many
know,
people per household is another thing.
how many people are living in each household, condition
Hmm.
of households, right? things like that, because there's a lot of situations where, there's the house is built, it's been lived in for years, but there's no maintenance going on, right? There's no ongoing maintenance, so you get all kinds of issues that can pop up just when something like that starts to age and there isn't any money available to modernize or do basic
Or sup-
repairs. So
right, and not necessarily enough supplies as well.
yes, yeah, absolutely. And again, in
Mm.
remote communities, it's challenging, right, to get building materials into the community. It can only come in via air most of the time. So, it's really slow to get. It's slow and it's expensive to build houses, to renovate houses, to keep them modernized and to keep them,
Hmm.
up and running properly. And then we look at things like healthcare services. You look at inflow and outflow ratios. So the number of people coming in versus the number of people leaving hospital, the wait times. That's another big one that you see all the time. Like how often does a doctor visit or a nurse practitioner visit, or a dentist? How often is professional
Optometrist.
mental health optometrist? Yeah, like all these things, basic things that are taken for granted in the South.
Hmm.
Um, the access in remote communities is just significantly worse than in the South. Um, and the percentage of population with a regular healthcare provider, that what is that, and would it improve, potentially with a connection to the provincial highway network? Probably, right? And that's one of those positive things, right? Um, so yeah, lots of indicators. There's many more, as I said, but I'm just sort of scratching the surface to give everyone an idea. But then let's look at land use and recreation, and trying to get an understanding of what's going on that front. So you could look at the number of households that are involved in outdoor activities, whether it's healthy activities like walking or snowshoeing, hunting, fishing, snowmobiling, like active type things. And so that's one measure for outdoor recreation, just to get a sense for maybe
Hmm.
exercise levels of community members as well. Again, it's all trying to paint that picture, that baseline of the way things are now, to understand the the healthiness or unhealthiness of the community, I guess, is another way
The
to describe
holistic picture.
the holistic picture. Yeah, looking at it from lots of different angles, considering lots of different factors. And then when we look at health, we talked about healthcare services, and okay, now let's move to community safety. Look at basic things, but important ones like the crime rate reported by the police. Uh, so whoever the police force is in the community, those numbers would be available. Incarceration rates, which is, incarceration means jail time. And
Hmm.
then looking at things like substance abuse, right? What percentage of the population has an addiction problem or something along those lines, and how many people are in treatment? How long have they been in treatment for? Overdose deaths have they increased? How has that changed over the years, and how do we foresee that possibly changing when the project is put in place? So all these things have to be looked at to help paint that picture and describe the way things are now. Now let's move on to talk a little bit about methods. So the general sort of description of this is that a mixed methods approach, excuse me,
Hmm.
would be used. And this is sort of a combination of what you call quantitative, where you're measuring things, numbers, and then qualitative, where you're describing things. And then, so we're going to look at those, and then we're going to look at the tools, also the data collection tools that'll be used for that. So it's attacking it in a lot of different ways. The quantitative way helps the proponent or proponents in this case collect information at a much broader scale, and compare with other places. Um, with a number of indicators, because there's many measures, as we showed you a few of before. But the qualitative approach is it adds to that quite a bit, because it helps understand topics in more detail and in more depth, from that lived experience perspective. So it's often really interesting, as you know, Jen, when you sit down and you're talking about these things in more detail, typically through these one-on-one kinds of or small group focus group discussions that would
Hmm.
occur. And
Yeah,
it,
there's so many
when you
stories
take that,
there. If you're
yeah,
tracking a person from birth, considering the services and the parents and their economic status, so to speak, and then moving through the entire system from school, healthcare, spiritual and cultural needs, and so on and so forth. So that's, an individual story times how many in the community and in the region as well.
it's pretty revealing, isn't it, Jen? And
Hmm.
then when you combine that with the quantitative one, with the numbers, right? It can be pretty. It can really give you a pretty good idea of what's going on in a community. That's for sure. Um, So in terms of how the baseline data will be collected, um, two types of sources. We call them primary and secondary. Secondary sources are the indirect ones. They're not firsthand, but they're from things like reports and studies and books and articles. So, for example, if Webequay has done a housing assessment or an on-reserve land use plan, we would access documents like those to get
Hmm.
some baseline information. So there's a pretty heavy research side of this.
Yeah,
And then
and
there's the
Statistics
primaries.
Canada.
Yes, Statistics Canada, the census information, that kind of
Hmm.
stuff. There's a lot there. There's a lot there. But then there's the primary side, which when we get them directly or firsthand. And these are, in my view, really interesting ones where you do the interviews or the surveys. And so you're getting information directly from community members, and so this would be online surveys or at consultation events where you ask attendees, community members, to fill out surveys, answer questions, and then we can take that information and help get an understanding of the way things are, which is ultimately part of that establishing that baseline.
Hmm.
Let's talk a little bit now about the desktop analysis side of things for the method. So we would be doing kind of what I talked about before, doing that detailed review of any published social and economic data. We need to do that for the 22 communities potentially impacted by the Northern Road Link, as well as municipalities that are within that regional study area. We would look at planning documents and information um, that we can get from other communities that we engage with, and we'll look at that and try to garner as much information as we can to help again establish that baseline.
Hmm.
And then we come to the field studies, which is a really interesting part of it. I talked a little bit about these before. There would be community socioeconomic surveys. I know, Jen, you've been involved in those on the Webequay Supply Road project, and
I have.
focus groups. Focus groups. We've done those before as well, and those are
Hmm.
really interesting because it's qualitative, so you're getting really good detailed descriptions from an individual perspective, and especially if you can practice uh, GBA plus principles and apply those principles, so you get a good cross section of all the different um, types of people, ages,
Demographics.
demographics within a community. It allows you to really get a good idea of the way things are. And then key information interviews or key informant interviews, where we quite often talk with, quite often it's people who work for the band, I would
Mhm.
say. You get information about, let's say they're in charge of healthcare, right? Let's say they're the director of healthcare, and you could sit down and talk to um, uh, them and get an understanding of how things work in terms of healthcare, some of the issues. Usually, you drill deeper after you have that sort of preliminary interview, and use that as a guide for discussions with in focus groups or one-on-one interviews as well too. So, lots of different ways of collecting information, and the more the merrier when it comes to information for field studies. Wouldn't you say so, Jen?
That's it, because it paints a fuller and more holistic picture, because then we start looking at mitigation measures and perhaps some preventive measures as well, because we were talking about safety earlier. So perhaps there's some prevention measures that can be put in place.
And I think
And
it can also help communities realize, if they haven't already, by going through this exercise, Jen, I think it helps them realize what they're missing and what they might need in terms of infrastructure as well too, doesn't it?
well, that's it. It can certainly help with planning, because they might have
Yes.
to grow, communities might grow, and then economic development might grow for the community as well as for entrepreneurs. So there's a lot of
Yes.
room for growth when we look at these documents when they're all done.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Wow. Well, we've run out of time, and just boy, that happened.
That
We
happened so
went through that
fast.
quickly. It happened so fast. So I just wanted to remind everyone they can contact us at northernroadlink.ca, or our website, northernroadlink.ca. That wraps up today's discussion. We hope this was helpful, and we want you to tune in again next week, um, for our next topic, which I don't actually have with me right now. Um, don't forget to keep in touch with our project team members via the contact information available on our website, northernroadlink.ca. Miigwech, and make sure to look out for project updates on social media and our website.
Miigwech.